beautiful homemakers. We are in Chapter 13 of Secrets of Fascinating Womanhood. Secret number 10. Handle anger femininely. Angela felt like a new bride for the next few days. At first Ted was reserved, but Friday evening, when Angela comforted him after he came home from work, he began to speak more freely and to confide in her. Ted spent all day Saturday catching up with the repairs around the home. He also fixed the lawnmower and mowed the lawns. Angela found several opportunities to admire his masculine skills. Ted gave a shy grin each time she did so. On Sunday morning, Angela wondered if she should ask Ted to take her and the children to church. But she thought it best to wait a little longer or wait until he offered. He did not offer, but he did take them all around to visit Angela's mother in the afternoon. On Monday after work, Ted brought his laptop computer and printer home. Later that evening, he sat at the dining room table and began using the computer to do his business accounts. To Angela's surprise, he seemed very much at ease and confident in what he was doing. When she praised his ability, Ted became highly enthusiastic and spent a long time showing her all that he could do with the business program he was using. Angela knew more about computers than she let on, but was still impressed with the way Ted had mastered the program. She, however, made up her mind not to have anything to do with the business, unless Ted asked her. She would keep herself free from masculine business concerns so that Ted could come home each day to a feminine, cheerful wife and be comforted. Angela began to find the intimate side of marriage better than it had been for years. Being free of resentment, she was able to respond freely to Ted. Nor did she mind if she became pregnant again. Ted had always wanted more children, but Angela had resisted this in the past. She feared what her friends might say. She had also wanted to be free to go out to work if necessary. But now that she understood her feminine role fully, and had seen the joy and fulfillment of the FW teacher and Elsie, with their large families and their mature years, she realized how short-sighted she had been. Remember what Elsie said, when you're in step with the world, you're out of step with God. Wednesday evening was Angela's final FW class. It was raining. After the evening meal, as she was clearing the table and the children were lying on the carpet doing their homework, Ted offered to drive her to the class. Angela was about to say, "It's okay, Ted, I can drive myself," when she remembered how a man enjoys helping a dependent and appreciative woman. So instead, she smiled at him and said, "That would be lovely, Ted." Then she walked over to where he was sitting in his chair reading the paper. She put her arm softly around his neck and kissed him on the cheek. He smiled. As Angela kissed him, she felt the prickles of his evening beard growth, and was about to say, "You need a shave," when she remembered secret number 1, accept him as he is, and said nothing. Actually, she could have admired that masculine trait, and rubbed her hands on his cheeks and chin. As she finished clearing the table, she congratulated herself on how she was gaining a good understanding of the FW principles. Feeling pleased with how everything was going, she hummed as she worked. Then she began to sing aloud a song she loved. Angela went into the kitchen and was still singing as she stacked the dishwasher. Suddenly she felt Ted's long arms encircle her from behind and hug her strongly. Then she felt him lift up her hair and kiss the back of her neck. "I really do love you, Angie," he whispered. Angela turned her head and saw Ted's eyes full of warmth and tenderness. He returned to the lounge, and Angela's heart almost burst with happiness. A lump came to her throat, and tears of joy trickled down her cheeks. Ted always liked to be early for appointments, so he drove her to class ahead of time. The rain had now become a drizzle. They arrived just as the FW teacher was being dropped off by her husband. Ted did not get out and open the door for his wife as the teacher's husband did, but Angela still felt proud and feminine that Ted had brought her. Angela entered the building and saw the teacher waiting for her inside the foyer. The teacher's eyes shone as she looked at Angela expectantly and asked, "Is it true? Is he home?" Angela nodded her head, blinking back her tears. Yes, he's come home. The teacher squeezed Angela's hand, and together they went down the stairs. The teacher unlocked the door of the classroom, and they went inside. There they hugged each other for a long time and wept freely. "Oh, Angela, I'm so proud of you. I'm so happy for you," the teacher said, and a beautiful smile shone through her tears. Angela felt the now familiar lump in her throat return. She dabbed her tears away with a tissue and sat down. Soon the other members of the class arrived. Bev, who was looking noticeably slimmer, made a grand entrance, holding up the cream sponge she had promised to make. She looked much more confident than normal. When the class were all seated, the teacher said, "Well now, how did you get on with last week's assignment to ask your husband for something you need?" Bev stood up and with an exaggerated air of nonchalance walked out in front of the class and hitched up the ankle-length dress she wore. She looked down at her feet and wriggled them. She was wearing a new pair of running shoes. The class cheered and clapped. "You got them! Well, good on you, Bev. Tell us how you did it," laughed the teacher. "I just asked him sweetly and said with a smile, 'Aiden, may I please have a pair of running shoes?' 'Yep, of course you can,' he said with a grin. So I acted delighted, which wasn't hard to do because I was. I said, 'Oh, I'm so excited, darling,' and I kissed him. He gave me such a lovely smile. He looked years younger and so handsome, even though he's nearly bald. The next morning he gave me a signed blank check and said, 'Get yourself a good pair, Mum.' He always calls me Mum. Bev, you never fail to amaze me. I am so very, very proud of you, and I really mean that," said the teacher. Bev sat down. The teacher smiled directly at Angela and said, "Now I think someone else has an experience to share with us." Angela smiled and stood up. A hush fell over the class as Angela shared her experience of asking Ted to come home and the thrill of having him back. Cherry, Helena, and Elsie couldn't stop beaming. When Angela had finished speaking, she saw the eyes of every woman in the room glistening with tears. She tried to hold back her own tears, but failed, and stood there weeping freely. Angela was aware that she had never cried so much in her whole life since taking the FW course. As she returned to her seat, both Cherry and Elsie stood up and hugged her tightly. The teacher's voice was full of emotion as she said to the class, "Fascinating Womanhood teaches us to enjoy our woman's role, both as a mother and as a companion to our husband. But it also encourages us to develop our spirituality. This is best done by using our God-given talents and reaching out to others, sharing truths that we have learned. I do this by teaching these FW classes. I want to share with you that the joy I receive is overwhelming at times. I also want to encourage every one of you to develop your spirituality by reaching out to others. It is so richly rewarding, far more so than working for money." "We have time for another experience." Elsie raised her hand. "Can I say a few words about how Fascinating Womanhood has improved my marriage?" "Certainly, Elsie. Come on up." Elsie, a true experience. "I have always had a good marriage. I took this course to gain more self-confidence. I had always accepted and admired my husband, but never told him so. I thought he must know it. It was hard for me to start saying these things, so I started by writing him notes. Then I progressed to saying complimentary things. His response was so great that I realized his need to hear those things. He started telling me the ways I pleased him, and this gave me the self-confidence I have always lacked. His tenderness towards me is fantastic. I feel like a bride again. The greatest thing was when he said with tears, 'I have come to realize that you are the sweetest, the most feminine woman in the world, and I love you so deeply I can't tell you how much. You are my whole life.'" "Oh, Elsie, what a lovely compliment to write in your love book." Now for our last secret. This secret teaches us how to handle an emotion that destroys many marriages. An emotion that usually brings out the worst in all of us. That emotion is anger, especially uncontrolled anger. When a person is angry, they can clearly know the right thing to do, but in the heat of their anger, they can do the exact opposite. Yes, Kathy? Whose anger are we talking about, ours or our husbands? Both, Kathy. This secret teaches us how to handle both our anger and our husband's anger. She then turned and wrote on the board, Secret number 10. Handle anger in a feminine and childlike manner. The teacher turned back to the class and smiled. Most of you look a little puzzled. She picked up her large black Bible off the table and opened it to a marked page and then said, Marina, you shared with us some words of Jesus in our lesson on femininity. Can you read them for us again now? She handed the Bible to Marina, who stood and read. Jesus called to his side a little child and set him in the midst of them and said, Truly I say to you, unless you repent and become like little children, you shall never enter the kingdom of heaven. The teacher took back the Bible and said, In this scripture, Jesus is teaching us to become like little children again. What are the qualities of little children that Jesus wants us to return to? Yes, Marina? Little children are teachable. Yes, a very important quality for us to have. Anybody else? They are humble and completely honest, said Helena. Yes, Helena, 2 very important qualities. Children are humble and honest, especially in the way they express their emotions. So tonight, we are going to learn from little children how to handle this emotion of anger, both in ourselves and in our husbands. First, we look at how to handle our own anger. We do need to stand up to men for our rights sometimes. Fascinating Womanhood does not teach women to be doormats. Men respect a spirited woman, one who'll get angry and stand up for her rights, as long as she does it in a non-challenging, feminine way. Men find a spirited woman quite fascinating. So when do we have a right to be angry with our husband? Sonia raised her hand. Yes, Sonia? I suppose when he has made a stupid mistake, like if he loses a lot of money, or when he's been lazy and hasn't mowed the lawn for weeks. Well, Sonia, those are both areas of male responsibility. We have to allow him to choose for himself what he does in those masculine roles. We can influence him, but we don't have the right, and nor does it do any good to show anger toward him. That's all a part of living secret number 1, accepting him as he is. However, there are limits, and we'll talk about those shortly. Yes, Helena? What about when he mistreats us? Yes, Helena. That's when we can show our anger toward our husband, when he mistreats us, or when he insults us, or criticizes us unfairly, even if he overworks us, or ignores us. We cannot be happy in our marriage if we allow our husband to mistreat us or take us for granted. I'm not talking about little things. It's best to overlook those, or to let them build up before speaking out. So, how do we express our anger in a way that doesn't arouse our husband's anger? Let's look at how a child expresses anger. Cherry, tell us how your little girl expresses anger. Cherry laughed. Well, sometimes she stamps her feet, and she has this cute way of folding her little arms, putting her chin in the air, and going humph. Then, if nobody takes enough notice, she tosses her curls and stomps out of the room, glancing back to see what effect it's having. Tina's real cute when she's angry. Wow, a perfect answer, Cherry. Just what we needed to hear. Yes, this childlike way of handling anger is cute. We women find it cute. Men find it even cuter, whether in little girls or grown-up women. It makes them want to hug us. Although some children, when they get angry, throw a tantrum and scream and yell and kick and say hurtful things. What happens then? That arouses our own anger, said Angela. Exactly. Angela is right. It arouses our own anger. But when a child or woman expresses anger the cute, childlike way that Cherry's daughter does, it doesn't arouse another person's anger. And more importantly, when a woman expresses her anger this way, it doesn't challenge her husband's masculinity. But when we start shouting or arguing, or worse still, swearing, we arouse our husband's own anger. We instantly kill his affection for us. We just wither it up, just like spraying a beautiful flower with weed killer. Why is this? Because when we direct our anger toward him in this way, we demean his authority and his masculinity. He becomes defensive and tries and often succeeds in blaming us for the problem. We also fall from our pedestal in his eyes. So we must always express our anger in a feminine, non-challenging way, without any harshness or ugliness, without losing our feminine charm, just as Cherry's daughter did. When you show your anger in this feminine way, you are far removed from arousing your husband's anger. In fact, the opposite occurs. He sees you as cute and fascinating, and you become adorable in his eyes. You actually enhance his love for you. What are some of the ways we can do this? Asked Diane. Well, Diane, there are many feminine ways to let off steam without challenging our husband's masculinity. We can stamp our feet, or beat our fists on his chest, or put our hands on our hips and pout, or fold our arms and turn our back on him with our chin in the air. With a hump, said Cherry with a giggle. Yes, men find all these things fascinating. They feel manly and protective. We become more lovable in their eyes. Now, one thing people that dislike FW always ridicule is a line in Helen's book where she talks about shaking your curls, stamping your feet, and, kind of what Cherry said her little girl did. She's not saying act like a little brat or a little girl. They're saying handle your anger, especially when it's just for something that irks you. Handle it in a childlike manner. Or if he says something that hurts your feelings, this is a perfect time to give this kind of reaction of stamping your feet, or like they said, arms crossed, turn away, chin up in the air, and call him a big meanie. The way the books kind of describe it is like Shirley Temple, and we don't need to act like Shirley Temple. What they're really trying to stress is don't react negatively. Learn to react in a childlike, girlish manner instead, to tease him out of what he was doing that annoyed you or irked you or hurt your feelings. And I must admit, after learning this, I was very surprised to realize that I do stamp my foot when I get angry. And it is funny and cute. My husband always laughs and makes a joke out of it, like, oh, I always wanted to marry a woman with a fiery temper. And he cajoles me out of my anger or my bad response to whatever silly thing he did. And when we speak, we can say things like, I'll never speak to you again. We can even call him names if we like, but make sure they are masculine names, like, you hard-hearted brute, or you stubborn, obstinate man, or you beast. Men don't mind those kinds of names because they enhance their masculinity. Men even smile when we call them names like these. But you never, ever, never use names that demean a man's masculinity. Never use useless or little man or abusive terms or dumb. Those kinds of names arouse deep resentment in a man, and they can permanently destroy his love for you, especially if he believes you mean what you say. This can be so serious that it's right up there with unfaithfulness in marriage. It's like your husband telling you to your face, I have never loved you. Now, when you tell your husband how he's mistreated you, it doesn't hurt to exaggerate a little, as a child does. You can say things like, how cruel, or how mean, or what a dreadful thing to do. We must come across to our husband like an adorable and helpless child who has been cruelly mistreated. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I can see Elsie looks horrified. Don't worry, Elsie. There are more reserved methods of showing anger for a quieter woman. There's the poor little me approach. This way of expressing our anger can be highly effective with any man. You know, the downcast eyes with our face in our hands, or whatever comes naturally to your personality. Perhaps just a quiet, "Oh dear." Genuine tears add greatly to all these ways of showing our anger. Genuine tears usually soften any man's heart. Crocodile tears won't. So these are all natural feminine ways of handling anger, and they don't hurt our husband one little bit. Rather, they increase his love for us, and they arouse in him a desire to make amends for our hurt. "Isn't it better just to be serene and keep our anger to ourselves?" asked Elsie. "In minor matters, Elsie, yes. We can work off mere annoyances by vigorous exercise or complaining out loud to ourselves when nobody can hear us. But even God gets angry over major things. Once strong anger has arisen, it's best to release it or diffuse it as soon as possible. Otherwise, it can settle into resentment and smolder for years. Bottled up anger and the lack of forgiveness which usually goes along with it can lead to depression and other illnesses. So we should release our anger quickly, as little children do. They flare up and then in a few minutes later they are serene again. It's really healthy. But remember, we're not talking about mere annoyances. We have to learn to take these in our stride. Usually a good night's sleep is all we need to clear away these feelings. But when our husband clearly mistreats us, we should show our upset feelings immediately. We should not wait. We need to express it straight away in a childlike manner. By letting him know as soon as we are hurt by his actions, a man can then immediately link his actions with the cause of our pain. He doesn't have to try and think back to what he might have said and done. Men like their wives to be open and straightforward with them, as long as we do not challenge their masculinity or leadership. Kathy spoke. "I can see why we shouldn't show anger toward a man when he's failed in one of his masculine duties. But we're still going to get angry at times. How do we handle those angry feelings without criticizing him?" "First of all, by forgiveness, Kathy. Remember, we women have our faults too. We can also use the techniques taught in secret number 5, like writing out our angry thoughts. Or we can work off our angry feelings by vigorous exercise. Aerobics are good, even a long brisk walk. Some women just need to sit in a peaceful place for about an hour. That works for me. Would probably work for you too, Elsie. But we're all so different. One woman told me that she drives off in her car and screams with all the windows up." "I punch the bed," said Kathy with a giggle. "That's okay, Kathy. Just let it out. Don't bury it. When we release our anger as a child does, we are much healthier and happier." But you don't want to be a hothead. And it's also been shown that, like when people are driving and they get upset at another car, all that does is make you angrier. Whereas if you start to get angry but then shut it down and say, "Oh, it's not worth it," you continue being serene. It's a really fine balance between letting your anger show when appropriate, but not being a grumbling complainer, not constantly getting angry at the little things he or anyone does. So don't misunderstand her point. Now, it could happen that your husband has failed too many times in one of his areas of responsibility. We're talking of extreme cases here, where he has caused you so much distress that it is appropriate for you to express anger towards him. But it still must be done in a feminine way. Vivian, one of our visitors, is going to share with us later how she used feminine anger to get her husband to fix a roof that had leaked for ages. Now, one final thing. In cases of very severe mistreatment, such as unfaithfulness, it can be most difficult for a woman to be childlike in her anger. It's still the best approach if you can do it, though. Let me read you the experience of Belle, a woman who went through one of the classes. Belle, a true experience. One night my husband went out with another woman. As I waited in agony for him to come home in the early morning hours, I determined to act with childlikeness. When he came home, I ran to the door to meet him, threw my arms around him weeping, and said, "Oh, how could you do this to poor little me?" My husband was aroused to compassion and took me tenderly in his arms, and that was the beginning of a new life for us. I'm going to end the video here, and we'll continue next time.